My title for this talk comes from a sonnet called God's Grandeur by the Jesuit priest and poet Gerard Manley Hopkins. The poem celebrates in Hopkins' typically exquisite wordplay how the glory of God shines out through everything in the world, regardless of whether humankind chooses to pay attention. Hopkins' poetry celebrates the unique, quirky characteristics of things in the world around him, such as patterns in mud puddles, the shine of soil in plowed fields, and the ring of stones tumbling down wells. The opening lines of the sonnet, God's Grandeur, here on the slide, a little hard to read, sorry, takes up this theme, finding divine glory in small, characteristic material details like light shining off shaken tinfoil or the way that crushed oil oozes in pools. People ignore this glory in their rush to use and abuse the natural world, he notes with regret. Yet he ends on a hopeful note. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. Whether or not people attend to it, in other words, the divine glory continues to shine and shape the world in the very material nature of the things around us. I open with the Hopkins poem for several reasons. First, he's been an essential part of my journey through a Jesuit education, especially as an English major in the Creighton Honors Program. I've loved Hopkins' poetry since high school, and when I first met Dr. Hawes as a freshman on the Swanson 9 honors floor, we shared an introduction by way of lines from Hopkins' poem, Duns Scotus' Oxford, which made me feel at home right away. Beyond those first few days, however, Hopkins' poetry and aesthetics theories continue to shape my intellectual journey at a deep level. His keen attention to the unique, characteristic structure of material things informs the way that I think about my own design, or that I think about design in my own work as a scholar, teacher, and digital designer. I invoke Hopkins' passion for the dearest freshness deep down things to consider how the material world around us shapes and structures our ideas as an ongoing source of creative inspiration. Following Hopkins' lead in God's Grandeur, I want to take some time this afternoon to reflect on the things in the world around us, what they mean to us, and how they influence our imaginations, especially when we write and design. I'm using the word things somewhat broadly here to encompass the material elements of the world around us, both natural and man-made. But by the way these things shape our writing and design work, I don't just mean the accessories that fuel our writing routines, such as our pens and notebooks, coffee cups, laptops, software, or cozy chairs. Rather, I want to spend time with the material things that grab our attention and mean something to us, in ways that we might not entirely fully understand. I suggest these things can shape the structure of our writing and design at a fundamental level, which I'll demonstrate through a few examples of digital writing that makes this shaping process visible. So in this talk, I'll explore the question, again, how do our things shape our ideas when we write and design? I'll highlight some key ideas from scholarly conversations that inform my own work, then briefly introduce my research on digital scholarship and design. After that, I'll walk through 3 examples to demonstrate how organizing metaphors based on material things shape the developing structure of digital writing projects. Finally, I'll close with reflective questions, guiding us to reflect on the role material things play in our writing processes, digital or otherwise. I hope you'll join me in taking some time to reflect on the strange, surprising beauty of the world around us, and use this time to bring to mind the things that most powerfully shape your own imagination and provide structure for your ideas when you write. As human beings, we tend to think not only in words, but also in images, metaphors, and sensory experiences. Scholars such as Lecoff and Johnson have demonstrated how human cognition and our ways of making sense of the world are fundamentally metaphorical. To borrow a phrase from Sherry Turkle, we tend to think with material things to help us make sense of abstract concepts. As a digital example, think of a computer desktop. You'll see files, folders, floppy disks, even a trash can. These aren't actually folders or trash cans, of course, but rather a user-friendly way of imagining abstract digital code. Early computer engineers could have designed their interfaces in any way imaginable. There's no inherent reason why screens should be organized like a desktop rather than like a kitchen or a tool shed. This desktop metaphor provides a familiar conceptual framework for organizing and interacting with information in a digital environment. In a similar way, scholars designing digital articles will sometimes use material metaphors to organize their ideas in ways that invite interactive exploration. One example is Susan Delagrange's beautiful digital article, called Wunderkammer, Cornell, and the Visual Canon of Arrangement, a copy of that here. It recreates a cabinet of curiosities, or Wunderkammer, for readers to explore. Her article focuses on how images spark new ideas through surprising combinations, and the way she designed her digital interface here encourages readers to experience that process for themselves through ongoing discovery and exploration. Really briefly, the way you go to the screen initially, those wooden doors are closed, and when you click on them, they open up, and then you can click on any of the squares there to start to explore the piece. It's really, really beautiful, and you have to play around with it to really appreciate it. So go check it out. In my research, I focus on object metaphors in a particular kind of digital writing, specifically the design processes behind creating digital scholarship, like Delagrange's article here. I look at online articles that use not only text, but also images, video, audio, and interface design, and more, in order to communicate an argument to an audience. For projects like these, design isn't just something added up to spice things up a little bit. Rather, the project's design, the unique characteristic structure that so captivated Hopkins in Nature, is central to the way it presents an argument in a digital environment. The argument in this case is more than just the article's explicit thesis statement, but it's the piece's total combination of media elements, the experience it creates, and the way it invites readers to learn through interaction. And I want to note that I focus on metaphorical objects from the perspective of digital writing and design. However, the more I talk to creative thinkers across disciplines, the more I learn about how this sort of brainstorming process emerges in their own work. And I suspect the same things that I'm finding will be true in other creative and design-based fields as well. So I'm excited to expand on these interdisciplinary implications in future projects, and also to hear your thoughts about how the role that metaphors play in your own field and your own work. In my dissertation research, I explored invention processes behind creating digital scholarship through 3 extended case studies. In these case studies, I designed 3 different digital scholarly projects and recorded my drafting process in close detail. These projects were all designed from scratch using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, along with some image, audio, and video files. So in each project, the article's text is embedded on a website along with the accompanying media elements. Goodness sakes. Articles like these can't be printed. They have to be engaged online to fully experience the information presented in multiple media dimensions. So just briefly on methods, over a period of 10 months, I collected video recordings, screen recordings, digital drafts, and notes from every composing session. And as I looked back over these recordings, I realized that in each project, I used some kind of material metaphor to organize my ideas and get started developing the digital project's online interface. This wasn't an intentional goal when I set out to design these projects, although I realized that many digital scholarly pieces that I most admire use a similar design strategy. But it really made me stop and think about why I dove into this brainstorming strategy and how my choice of material metaphor influenced my ideas in each project. Now, this reflection has helped me to acknowledge that as much as I might think I'm in control of my own writing and ideas, I'm always being influenced by things that get me excited and send me off in potentially a new direction. This is very much a normal part of writing processes as recent writing research continues to foreground. But even so, as the author, I'm the one who's ultimately responsible for what appears on the page or the screen, and so it's important to take time to stop and consider the way that these material metaphors influence my own ongoing digital writing and design. So I'll move into some examples now, and by focusing on the things that shape my own imagination in these examples, I'm inviting us all to thoughtfully, consciously, and creatively attend to the dearest freshness deep down things in our material environments. My first example comes from a collaborative digital article created with scholar and dancer Kaustavi Sarkar, who was trained in a classical Indian dance tradition called Odissi. Our project explores how motion capture technology can adapt Odissi movement for a digital environment. Our organizing material metaphor is a Hindu temple, specifically the Rajrani temple located in the Indian state of Odisha. You can see the temple in the background here in this image. Temples play a central role in the Odissi dance tradition, an expressive form initially developed and practiced by temple dancers. Temple walls are covered with sculptural bodies representing these temple dancers frozen into poses that make up the grammar of Odissi dance. In this central image, Kaustavi, my collaborator, poses in a niche of the temple, a live dancer framed against the sculptural dancing bodies. So here's an earlier draft of the same project that was a couple months later down the road. So as our organizing material metaphor, the temple's architectural structure shaped our project in a fundamental way. And here I'll focus in on a few key changes that happened throughout the drafting process. So first off, my main goal in designing the digital article was to showcase custodies motion capture videos. Using the temple as a foundation, as you can see here, I wanted to embed these videos on the temple walls over the dancing sculptural figures to emphasize continuity between the videos she was creating and the dance tradition out of which they emerged. And you can see here a couple of those images, just at least as initial placeholders layered over the sculptures in the back. However, I didn't quite have the technical skills, tools, or time needed to pull off that idea at that particular moment, and so we ended up having to explore other design directions as the project continued. Additionally, relying on the temple as a foundational metaphor led to some challenges in setting up the article's navigation, as you can see here. So as these screenshots illustrate, I lined up the navigation bars along columns on either side of the central niche. This approach worked with the photo, providing our material metaphor, but for readers coming to this project for the first time, not really knowing where to go, it didn't provide clear enough direction to help them make their way comfortably through the article's digital pages. Finally, the temple aesthetic contrasted in some ways with the aesthetic of Odyssey dance. In the Odyssey dance tradition, movements should be curved and fluid, but in contrast, the temple's architectural details are frequently square and static, with lots of sharp corners and bodies frozen in stone. So although we were talking about movement in the dancing body in our article, our design's visual structure highlighted architecture as the main focus. So we fixed this in subsequent drafts by devoting far more space to the motion capture videos. So again, moving here from a very small version, as you're seeing here on the right-hand side, to a screen that really showcases the video a lot more. And then we also made sure in the final version, as you can see here, that all the media elements had rounded corners rather than square. So these are just small details of material structure, but they made a huge difference in the overall experience we create for our readers and the kind of argument that we were trying to communicate. My second example comes from a digital review essay, which explored how to review digital books in the ways that pay attention to their design as well as to their content. The material metaphor I used to structure this piece was a magpie and a nest. Magpies have a folkloric reputation for stealing shiny things and bringing them back to their nest as sort of a treasure collection. Although this behavior has been scientifically disproven, the associations between magpies and stealing treasure remains a strong cultural idea. I also found this material metaphor personally appealing due to my lifelong love for drawing birds. Overall, the magpie and nest helped me to frame my argument for what it means to be a digital designer reviewing other authors' digital scholarship. As a process of taking pieces from others' publications and rearranging them in my own digital nest. So here's an earlier draft of that same project. Once I'd settled on the magpie and nest metaphor, it became the conceptual foundation for the rest of the essay's design. However, this metaphor, or at least the way that I illustrated it, also caused some problems that forced me to rethink my design ideas. So here's some example of some of the initial interior pages of that project. As you can see, I didn't leave myself a lot of space for text or for other navigation apart from the illustrations, which takes up most of these slides. Most of the web pages were filled with these interactive illustrations, media clips, pushing the text and the navigation to minuscule margins. However, the magpie and nest metaphor also provided a way to solve this problem. So rather than trying to fill the navigation bar with text, I used objects from the opening splash page as icons to represent individual interior pages, which you can see those objects aligned here along the navigation bar. And this ended up saving a lot of room and helped to tie the whole project together a little bit more coherently. So material metaphors can be powerful though, and they can run away with your imagination if you're not careful. Before I fully realized it, the magpie and nest metaphor had taken over nearly the entire review essay. As you can see here, this is some of the interior pages, and each page involves both the magpie nest navigation bar and also images of the magpie throughout. So it appeared prominently on every page and focused more attention on the essay's design rather than the works that I was supposed to be reviewing. Fortunately, the editors generously allowed me to submit a print review essay as well as a digital one, so that content was covered elsewhere for readers interested in a more traditional review. Even so, it was a good reminder that material things can spark ideas, but it is up to the author to manage the direction in which those ideas unfold. This final example presents a bit of a different case study in which material metaphor played a role in the drafting phase, but not in the final design. Even though this object, in this case, didn't make its way into the final version, I suggest it's still important to look at the behind-the-scenes work of making digital scholarship to understand how a project takes shape and how this shape influences the final version's argument. So this example here is a digital book chapter, part of an edited collection on teaching with literacy narratives, or stories of how people learn how to read, write, and communicate. My chapter in this collection focused on finding ways to engage religious literacies in classroom contexts. I tried to use a candle metaphor to invoke warm, bright, and personal associations with religion, rather than a symbol such as the building that would be possibly too abstract or institutional. Furthermore, candles appear in multiple religious traditions and can suggest religion without necessarily signifying a particular tradition. Overall, a candle as material metaphor had multiple rich symbolic dimensions that I could use to design an overall digital interface. So this particular interface didn't go through quite as many drafts as the previous two examples, but the candle metaphor still appeared in several versions. So I started off by playing with a candle image seen here in warm reds and golds against a black background and a collection of ornate wax displays. And then the first digital illustrations were similar to a festival or celebratory candle display with several tall candles in a single row. However, as I was finishing up my work on this draft, there was an act of religiously motivated violence on the campus in which I was at the time, at the end of which the perpetrator was killed and several students and faculty were seriously injured. This changed my experience of writing and designing the article significantly, especially since the editors asked me to expand on my brief mention of the attacks in my chapter. So the shift was reflected in the design as well, as you can see here in this later draft. Along with the new introduction and conclusion to the chapter, the interface design took on symbolic dimensions more of memorial or votive candles, which really gave the whole chapter a lot more of a solemn tone. So again, none of this imagery appears in the final version. So since it's a chapter in an edited collection, the editors chose a different interface design to build consistency across the collection as a whole. However, for me as an author and designer, this material metaphor still played an important role in developing the chapter and in how I thought through what it was that I wanted to say. So there's so much to explore with digital scholarship as an emerging form of communication, and I'm really excited to continue both practicing and researching this kind of work. In closing, though, I want to think about some implications for a broader range of writing practices, especially in light of the lines by the Jesuit poet Hopkins with which I opened my talk. First, whatever kind of writing you do, I encourage all writers to pay more attention to the material objects and metaphors that spark your ideas. Whether these ideas are visually, verbally, spatially, audibly represented, what images tend to inspire you? What does your mental landscape look like when you write? What objects are present there, and how do these objects then shape your work? What are some of the associated personal, cultural, or material symbolic resonances? I've mentioned a few for me, such as temples, candles, birds, and nests, but everyone's answer will be different based on your experiences, preferences, and the kind of writing that you create. Once you've identified these key concepts, I encourage writers to pay attention not only to how just these concepts maybe appear in a passage or two, but how they shape a document as a whole. So do these metaphors appear evenly throughout a document, or are they as part of the main argument? Are they used consistently or sparingly? Or maybe do they conflict with other shaping material constructs? Do they take over the argument to a point of distraction? Or do they serve as a vehicle just subtle and engaging enough to get across the main ideas without necessarily getting in the way? Finally, I encourage writers to think about the way material metaphors might operate across different modes of media. If a certain object is a powerful vehicle for communicating an idea, how might you make it even more present using the technologies available to you? What images, words, videos, sounds, and movements might you include to emphasize readers' experiences of that object? This is not to say to add in all the possible bells and whistles. We've all seen documents, especially online, in which the composers get a little bit carried away by all the possibilities. However, a few strategic elements across modes here and there might go a long way in inviting readers to experience your ideas and argument along with you even more fully. I open this talk with a quote from Gerard Manley Hopkins, hiding his keen, optimistic attention to the vibrant individuality of everything that exists. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. This line is rooted both in his own aesthetic sensibilities and in his vocation as a priest formed in the Jesuit tradition founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola. As St. Ignatius tells us in the spiritual exercises, which provide the foundation for Jesuit life and prayer, all things have the potential of calling forth in us a deeper response to our life in God. As writers, designers, and thinkers, I invite us all to pay closer attention to the material things that spark our ideas and how these things shape our developing thoughts and drafts in subtle yet fundamental ways. I encourage us all to pay close attention to what new freshness, what new ideas these things call forth from us in our imagination, our writing, and our everyday lives.